Welcome back, everybody, after a somewhat long uh, hiatus. Um, so, if you haven't already, there's a methods and loops practice video up, linked to from my other channel that I do live sessions on. And that is on the Java APCS playlist. Feel free to go watch that. It also includes a discussion of variable scope, which is very important. So here we're going to get into array practice, or arrays really. So what is an array? Well, an array is, if I have a basic variable here, let's call it, int x, because I'm deciding to be very vague here. Let's say I have an int x, and it holds the value 9. Well, that's all well and good. But let's say I need to hold some other information. Maybe int y equals 50, int z equals 82, int L equals 42, the answer to life, the universe, and everything. Int K equals 4, int M equals 29, and maybe 422. There we go. So lots of 2's here. Shows where my defaults go. So we have a lot of integers here, and it seems like, say, if I were to track 50 different grades from someone, I need 50 different variables, and that seems like an inefficient way to sort of type things, right? Now, back in the day, when everyone just used assembly language, well, you'd kind of have to do this. But we've since developed these storage methods and these storage devices within coding called arrays. And what an array is just sort of taking all of these values, all of these integers, sort of slamming them into one name and giving it a notation to be able to access all of that. So if one integer is just one box, this is one variable. Well, an array might be one long box with a bunch of spaces for information. So maybe I'll have a space here for 9, I'll have a space here for 50, I'll have a space here for 82, and 42, and 4, and 29, and 422. Okay, so obviously these are not valid code. But maybe instead of just storing something in a box that has only one slot, we can create a box that has a bunch of slots for information. And this is called an array. Now, the preferred notation for an array of this sort is to actually use curly braces if I'm just giving standard values. So this array would actually be represented with 9, 50, 82, 42, 4, 29, and 422. Well, this is the concept of an array. This is what the actual array would be represented as. Comma separated. Each value is separated by a comma. Each value is the same data type. These are all integers. That's important as well. And finally, I'd probably want to give this some sort of name. So I'd say we have an integer here, an integer array, and this is my special array notation. And I'm going to call it grades. So maybe, I'm in some class, and I get a bunch of grades, and I want to store them somewhere. And so we can see that this becomes a valid Java statement. I have a set of boxes smashed together, or a box with a bunch of divisions in it, and each one can hold a different number. It has a definite size. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pieces, 7 elements. And it has a name, grades. Now, when we're declaring an array, we could declare it this way where we can hard code in all the values that it holds. We can also declare it some other way, and we're going to look at that in just a minute. But in this case, we are declaring the array, setting aside memory, and initializing it to something, right? Or even really instantiating it here. So this inside the braces, that's actually an array. We're storing it in the value in the variable grades, which has the data type int array. And all is well and good, and I could print out certain pieces of this. Well, if I try to print out grades itself, I'm going to run into something that's a little weird. This is actually the address of the array in memory. And we aren't going to go into that right now, but needless to say, it's not what we want to print. It's not going to print the array out. So one thing that we can do is we could print a single element. Well, we're programmers, and we like to start from 0. So we'll print out the 0th element, and we'll see what comes up. So think first what that might be. If I run this, it's definitely 9. What if I print element, say, 4? It'll print the 4, which is in position 4. 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. If I print out element 5, it should be 29. And element 6 then would be 422. Another thing that I could do is say, oh, well, what's the length of the array? And I could print this out. It would tell me how many values I have, but not what the last position is. Remember, the last position was 6. So if I said something like, show me position 7, because it's 7 long, I'll get an error. I'll get an exception, of course in thread main, but we read this part, array index out of bounds exception 7. So 7 is out of bounds. We don't have a position 7, so it doesn't make sense to look for it. Okay, so this is one thing to consider with arrays. It's a one-off error where we're looking beyond the end of the array for values when we don't have any. It's like you're trying to reach into a box and you miss the box. You reach to the right of the box, or you reach to the left of the box. You're not actually grabbing things inside the box, so you come up empty with an error. Okay, so let's think of how I might print some values, or even change some values. Let's say I want to change the value in grades. Let's say instead of that 50, I want to get rid of that 50. So that's position 1. Remember, we start with 0. Well, grades 1, I'm going to say that's going to be equal to, instead of a 50, maybe let's say I got an 85. Much better grade, right? And then I can print that. And you can see I have 85 there instead. Oh, oops. That obviously I have grades 1. I can print that and also get 85. So we can look at this and we can say, okay, well, what if I wanted to print all the grades in this? By the way, this will obviously work for changing any element. I could change it to 0 and it would change the 9 to an 85, or 6, 5, or 6, and it would change the 422 to an 85. So how would I print out all of these? Well, it turns out I'd have to loop through and print out each element individually. So here's how. For int I equals 0, I is less than, and the less than is very important, grades.length, I++. Now, the reason we use .length without parentheses is because this isn't it's a value, it's a field of this array. It's not a method. So this is a public variable that's created when the array is created. And it is the length of the array. So arrays' lengths don't change. If we want to change the length of the array, we have to make a new one. Now, to print out the whole array, I'll do the following. I'll print grades position I. Well, why would I do grades position I? Well, I is changing every time I loop. And it starts at 0, which is this value. And then it ends at less than 7. So it would end at 6. So I won't run into any errors. So let's see how this works out for me. It prints out in new lines each one of the values, finishing with 85, which makes sense because I replaced 6, which was 422, with 85. Now, if I wanted to print this out in a slightly different format, maybe I'd say grades I plus, yeah, we'll say plus a comma, even though we're going to get an error at the end. And then at the end of this, we do something like that. And then we say do something like that. And if we want, we could even do something like this, where we, if I is not equal to grades.length minus 1, we'll print a comma. And that just means that I won't have a comma at the very end. So if I'm not at the last position, I'll print out a comma. This just formats my array. Ooh. This just formats my array in such a way that it looks like an array. I'm just printing things out in a way that, looks sort of pretty. But the main content is right here. Okay, well, what if I wanted to change it so I only print out some elements of the array? Well, I could always change my starting index. Maybe 2. And then I only print out these values of the array. I could change my ending index. And then suddenly I get this sort of error here because I didn't specify in my if statement to handle, say, the new end of the array. But that said, you certainly can change what you print out. And not only can I change what I print out, I could always set the values. So I could say grades I equals I. So I'll set the values in certain positions, and then maybe I'll print out. So then I changed all the values, I printed them out. So you need loops to print out arrays for now. And we can modify them. We can move them around. We can look inside them. And that's really useful because now we have a way of storing a bunch of information in just one variable name without having to do all of this crud up here. And I'm going to leave you, this is going a little long, but I'm going to leave you with one more thing, and that's going to be an alternate way of creating an array. So here I'm defining my size sort of implicitly by having some array already made. Now I'm going to define my size explicitly, but I'm not going to initialize any of the values in the array to things that I care about yet. So let's say I'll make a new int array, and here's where I define my size. Maybe I'll say 7, or maybe I'll say 50. Okay. And I'll set, say, 6 to, let's delete that. But in either case, I can still do the same things. This just doesn't define some starting values. It'll set things to 0, for example. So if I run this, it'll set every value in the array to I, and I have 50 values, so it'll set from 0 to 49. Another thing I could do is I could, if I wanted to start from 1, I could say I plus 1, 1 to 50, I plus 5. I could set it there. If I want to do multiples of I could say I times 5, or I times 2 to only have even numbers, or I times 2 plus 1 to only have odd numbers. So there's a lot you can do here. And you can also modify the index here. I could say I plus 1 and grades length minus 1 so we don't run into an error. But I could always say that, and I could see that, oh, the initial position is a 0. What if I don't initialize any of these, or don't set any of these to values that, as I'm going along, what do I have in the array to start? Well, we can see that the default value for an int array for every position as soon as it's initialized up here and instantiated with this new keyword, the initial values are all 0. And I'm going to leave you with that for this video. In the next video, I'm going to show sort of how to manipulate a 2D grid with an array, but this array is going to be somewhat special. It's going to actually be an array of arrays. Okay, until next time.